Good evening all, welcome to PHP Northeast. Thank you for taking the time to attend our event this evening. Special thanks to our sponsors, Ronald James Group. If you're looking for a new role or you want to recruit some new hires, go and check them out. They're a great recruitment agency and we're delighted to be working with them. I Am Property, they're always on the lookout for developers. So if you're looking for a new developer to add to your team, please go and check them out. So yeah, please both check out both of our sponsors. And without further ado, let me pass you on to our speaker for this evening, Chris Harvey, who is going to be speaking to us about FFI in PHP 7.4.
Second. Cool, thanks for that, Nathan. So I'm Chris Harvey, and in this talk I'm going to give you a brief intro to the foreign function interface in PHP 7.4. Before I get started, however, I just want to give a quick plug for a role we currently have available at Climb, where I work. We're currently looking for a senior PHP developer to join our team full time, so if this sounds interesting, drop me a line on Twitter or send me an email. So let's get started. So who am I? I'm Chris Harvey. I'm the lead backend developer at Climb, now part of Precision Procode Group. I've been a big fan of PHP for a long time. I've been using it since I was about 9 years old, roughly. And I like to use it for things that it really shouldn't be used for. So a bit of history into PHP. For those of you who don't know, PHP was never actually designed to be a programming language, which is a bit of a shocker. It was developed in 1995 as a templating system to sit between C code and HTML. So the idea was that you'd write your backend code in C and expose data to your HTML using PHP. But I think we can all agree that PHP has come a long way since then, and it's quite a fully fledged language these days. But in PHP 7.4, PHP is bringing back some of those early ideas in the form of FFI. So FFI is the foreign function interface. It's a system that allows you to run C code in PHP natively, or any other language that has a C compatible ABI like like Rust or C++ and other like compiled languages like that. It's been available since PHP 7.4, but it's also available as a PECL extension for some older versions. So you're probably thinking, what's so good about that? Well, there are tons of high quality C, C++, and Rust libraries out there, which you can pretty much now use in PHP natively. So it can remove the need to use Symfony process or shell exec or pass through and functions like that. And it gives you direct access to the library's exposed functions without having to call a CLI tool with arguments from PHP and then parsing its response, which if you've ever had to do that, you may know that it can be quite a pain, especially when the responses some of these command line tools give out is hard to parse. So it also allows you to write PHP extensions and release them via Composer, which removes the need for PECL in a lot of cases. And it can also provide a performance improvement in some cases, specifically in like memory intensive workloads. And it also enables all kinds of crazy stuff that you can now do in PHP, which wasn't possible before. For example, you could use the TensorFlow C library natively in PHP to allow you to write machine learning applications in PHP. It can give you direct access to the hardware of your machine, opening up a lot of new possibilities for command line applications. You could build a SAS compiler in PHP if you don't have access to Node or NPM. Actually, the Node SAS package on NPM actually uses the libsas C library underneath, which is exposed to Node.js via a similar implementation that we now have in PHP. Or you could go totally crazy and build desktop applications in PHP, or maybe Gameboy emulators and things like that. So how does it work? So by default, FFI is enabled in the PHP CLI, and also files that are loaded via opcache preloading. This is kind of a security feature because the C APIs are quite powerful and give you some pretty much raw access to the hardware, which is why they have to be in preloaded files. So it's unlikely that if your application was to be compromised or anything like that, it's unlikely that they'll be able to inject raw C code into your preloaded files. You can also enable it everywhere. I wouldn't recommend this, but if you set FFI enable to true in your php.ini file, then it'll be enabled everywhere. So to use a C library in PHP, you can call the function cdef on the FFI class and pass C type declarations as a string in the first argument, and then the name of the C library that these declarations are for in the second argument. So you can see in this example, I've imported libc, and I've used the printf function. PHP has a built-in printf function, which is pretty much exactly the same. So you probably wouldn't want to do this particular example, but it gives you an idea of how you can access things like that. You can also move these C declarations, because if you have a large library that you want to use, you can move these declarations into a C header file, like a .h file, and then import them using FFI load. So you do FFI load, then the name of the header file, and then you can access the data in the same way. So generally, you'd use the header file that comes with the C library. Most C libraries come with a header file that allow you to pass these in. So you can pretty much load them in directly into FFI, but you will need to strip out any preprocessor directives first. And there are actually tools to do that, so that's not usually much of an issue. So instead of talking about how cool it is, I'm going to give you a few quick demos. So about some of the crazy stuff you can do. So this is an implementation of GTK3, which is like a graphical interface toolkit, which is mostly used on like Linux distros, but is actually cross-platform. So you can see I've got a header file here, which declares a lot of the types from GTK, and then I've exported some of the functions here that we're going to use in this example. So in your PHP code, as I mentioned before, you do FFI load, the name of the header file, and then you can use the new function to create a new instance of a C type. So in this case, it's a int32 that I'm creating here. You can then you can call the methods just on the FFI class that you've instantiated. So for example, I've got GTK3, GTK init, and then I call FFI address, which gives you access to a pointer in C. So then I pass in the pointer to the variable I declared before. And then I run GTK, new window, then I add a button created with PHP. Then I add that to a container, I set the border, and then I set the title, and then I show it. And then I run the GTK main loop to keep the application running. So I will show you this now. So I'm going to run this example, which is run.php. So I run php run.php. As you can see, nice little windows popped up, the graphical window with the window title that was set in here, and the button in the middle created by PHP. So that's pretty cool. There's also someone has made a PHP game using FFI. So I'll give you a quick demo of that. So here we have like a basic shooter game. You have PHP logo flying around, and you've got an elephant at the bottom. You can fire and basically play the game, which is pretty cool as well. That uses the SDL library. And if you wanted to go totally crazy, you could run a Gameboy Emulator. So here I've got, I think it's Pokemon Yellow, running in PHP, which all works. The key bindings work and everything, so you can, yep, so I can play this game in PHP, which is pretty cool. So that's all great, but you're probably thinking from that, but what about real world applications? So, as I said before, you could bind the TensorFlow C library, which is pretty cool. So you can do machine learning natively, and you don't have to swap languages. You could do audio, video, image manipulation. There's some cool libraries out there for that. And yeah, pretty much any C library you can find, or any C compatible library, you can now bind to PHP. But before you jump in and start wrapping every C library out there, there are a few caveats you need to be aware of first. Because we're working with C, you will have to manage the memory yourself, which PHP normally does for you. So you're probably not used to like freeing up resources and things like that. So PHP does try and help you with this. It tends to like manage some of the C instances that you've got span up. But if you call a function in C and that addresses some memory and returns objects to you, then you're pretty much on your own. So you'll have to free the memory yourself. So if you called a function, it would not be freed automatically. So when you're done with a pointer, you do have to call ffi : free and then pass the variable to it. C libraries generally have functions to free resources anyway. I'm not sure if you all know this, but a lot of the stuff in PHP was originally just bindings from C libraries. So if you've ever seen, like, for example, curl close, that's pretty much a function in PHP to free up the resources that curl started using. I'd recommend you keep your FFI logic of your app or library self-contained. So don't return pointers to consumers of your library, because that's generally not a good idea. And then if that memory gets freed, then the variable will still be there, but it could address like a random bit of memory or just totally crash. So on that note, I'm going to give you another demo of something I built, which is kind of a real world application. So I built a library called PDF-Kit, which wraps a C library called WK-HTML to PDF, which essentially renders PDFs using WebKit. So I'm not sure if you've ever used DOM PDF or MPDF, but they're great libraries. However, they're sort of limited by what PHP can do. So they pretty much have to implement their own renderers, which works really well. But in some cases, those libraries can render really bad PDFs. So in this case, I've wrapped that library, and I've made some nice functions to make it work easily. So you can add a page. So I'm just for this demo, I'm going to convert Hacking News homepage to a PDF. You can actually pass PHP closures into C functions. So there is a function in WK-HTML to PDF that takes a callback, for example, on progress changed, which I've named this one. This will be called basically every time something changes. So you'll get a nice percentage of how far through the process it is. I've also added some nice save to functions and then a convert function, and some methods that give you any warnings that were generated or any errors that were generated from rendering it. So I'll show you what I did here. So this is the PDF kit library. It's pretty much all those methods I showed you before. However, I'm calling another library, another class which I wrote, wk-html to PDF, which is pretty much a class that has a magic call method on it. So with this, it basically just used the PHP's magic call method to pass those calls along to FFI. And the reason I did this was because of the memory issues I mentioned before. So in general, most of the functions are fine. So I have a magic call method. It passes that along to the FFI library that I instantiated. And it normalizes some arguments, and I'll explain why that is in a moment. But I did override some of the functions. For example, wk-html to PDF create converter does have pointers returned from it, so you do need to free the memory afterwards. So I wrote this garbage collectible class. So if you're not aware, PHP has a built-in garbage collector, which basically frees up memory automatically for you when it's not used anymore. So what I did here, the garbage collectible constructor takes in two anonymous functions. One I've called a constructor, which basically calls the method that it was referencing anyway and passes the arguments along to it. And the second I've called the destructor. So this is pretty much the same thing. So when we're done with this, it will call wk-html to PDF destroy converter, and it will pass along what the constructor returned. And the reason for this is, so if you look here, I've got the constructor, which takes in two callables, a constructor and a destructor. So it sets those as properties, and then it calls the constructor immediately and assigns that to object. And then when the last use of this class is found in PHP, so if you stop using this in PHP, this class, PHP will automatically call destruct. So what I've done here is, if there's not a destructor, we just automatically call FFI free and then pass in the object. But if there is a destructor, which I did have in my example because there was a function available for it to free the memory created by that. So if there is a destructor, we just call that and pass the object to it. And then that's pretty much how that works. So I'll give you a quick demo of that. So I've got PDF kit here. So I've got my hack and use example. So I'll just go back to the code. So it calls these nice methods that I created here. So it feels like a PHP composer package. And then we call convert. If it fails, it'll throw an exception, which I have in here somewhere. Fine, there it is. So this library has a finished callback. So if it's not successful, I just throw a conversion failed exception and then print out the errors. So, and also I've got an on progress changed callback, which will just var dump the progress as it goes. So I'm going to quickly run this example. So you can see it's var dumping the progress of each of these. So we've got 10%, 20, 23, 27. The reason this goes to 100 back to 0 to 100 is because there are multiple stages in the conversion. So that's not actually a bug, that's a feature, if you will. So now that will have generated me a PDF and saved it to hackanduse.pdf, which I will show you now. Where am I? PDF, sorry. Open this PDF now. And as you can see, that's almost exactly how that website looks. Whereas if you ran this through DOM PDF, the output you'd get would be a lot different to what you see in here. And it also runs JavaScript in the library, which I don't believe DOM PDF or MPDF are capable of at the moment. So that's pretty cool. So this is essentially what most people want from their PDF generation. You write your HTML, and then basically what Chrome would give you in print when you wanted to print the page, that's pretty much what you want to be displayed, and that's pretty much what this does. Okay. Okay, so there are a few considerations you need to keep in mind, as well as the memory management side of it. So to use it in web requests, you will need to use opcache preloading, which is a file that gets ran basically in PHP FPM. It runs this file first and then compiles these files, which is good for performance anyway. So it's probably a good idea to use that anyway. And that means if you wanted to change any of your C bindings, you would have to restart PHP FPM, which you'd probably do as part of your build process anyway. You'll also need library binaries for each platform you intend to support, and that includes each architecture. So if you're running on multiple CPUs, different architectures like x86 or ARM, you will need binaries for each of these platforms, as well as each of the operating systems you intend to support. But generally, your target is usually a container, so this isn't generally an issue. So you'll probably only need the binary for Linux, for example, and then in Docker, this will happen. This will just work. You won't need the other bindings. And the last consideration I'd say is be careful. A lot can go wrong when you do this, but it is a really cool thing to do. If you have a C library that you'd like to wrap, it can enable all kinds of really cool things in PHP, which weren't possible before. But just make sure you're free of the memory, like I said, and don't go too crazy with it. For example, I wouldn't recommend building desktop applications in PHP. But it was a cool demo, and I only added it in here to show you how powerful FFI can be. So if you want to try out any of these, I've released PDF Kit, which I showed you before, on my GitHub page. That's the first link at the top. Some of the other examples, like the Gameboy Emulator and things like that. There's a cool GitHub repo called Awesome PHP FFI, which you can check out. And there's for the PHP shooter game, that's on that repo as well. So thanks for listening to me. I hope you've learned something, and I hope you give it a try, because it's a lot of fun. If you have any questions, do contact me on Twitter. I'll be happy to help you out. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. It's safe to say I've never seen PHP used like that before. That was a really interesting application of PHP. And please do go and check out those repos. They look really interesting. So yeah, before I go, just a quick thanks again to our sponsors, Ronald James Group. Check them out if you're looking for a new role or you want someone new for your team. And I Am Property, always looking for developers, and I'm sure would be happy to hear from you. So I'm looking forward to seeing you next month. We do have a speaker lined up next month, but we need to confirm the details on that. But hopefully we'll have an announcement out about